Hey, all, welcome to the Common Good Podcast. Strange day for us to be doing this on a Friday, but we will do whatever we can to be able to talk with Andrew Whitehead on the podcast. So, Andrew, so glad that you're here with us today, and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much. Good to see you again, Doug.
Thanks. Hey, I will say that to me, and maybe to a lot of people who follow our work, our podcast about Christian
Mhm.
nationalism, our online training, you're a staple. We've been traveling the country much of 2022 and 2023, and we do a presentation at churches and for civic organizations. And you're in our presentation, so I feel like I'm talking to you all the time. I mean, I'm carrying you around, in a computer as a video. So nice to have you here for real this time.
Yeah, definitely. No, I appreciate that. It's been really great to be able to be part of the conversation, ongoing work, in however we can. And so, yeah, that's really encouraging to hear. So, thank you.
All right. Hey, we start our podcast often with a little chit chat about the weather, with a reminder that we don't always agree on things and can't even see the world in the same way, but we do live under the same sky.
Yeah,
So it's a
yeah,
good little reminder. It's cloudy, wet, and like 38-degree for the high in Minneapolis today. And just one of those days where winter is like, it can be worse. So you just hold on. It's kind of reminding you, that it's really, really coming, but it's mild for the, whatever this is, the 15th of December. How are things there in Indiana?
yeah. It's actually clear blue skies, which is rare for us this time of year. Usually, it's the permacloud has kind of set in.
Mhm.
So I'm enjoying seeing the sun. And I think the high is right around 50 or so today. So it was really mild yesterday, mild today. So I'm trying to enjoy this weather while I have it because I
Right.
know once March gets here in April, we'll have winter hanging on. So yeah.
Well, Andrew, we're going to talk about this great book that you have out, American Idolatry, How Christian Nationalism Betrays the Gospel and Threatens the Church. And I will add, as I did in the description, not only threatens the church, I think it threatens the civic life of the American enterprise. It's really a problem. But let's talk a little bit about you first before we get into the dark side of these effects on our society.
Yeah.
You're an associate professor
Hmm.
of sociology at Indiana University-Purdue.
Hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm, professor of sociology and social scientist here in Indianapolis. Our school is actually just being renamed. It'll be Indiana University, Indianapolis next fall.
Oh,
So yeah, I've been here for about 3.5, 4 years. Before that was in South Carolina at Clemson, and been
mhm.
studying Christian nationalism for a little over a decade now. So
Yeah.
the years keep going by, and all of a sudden, I've been doing this for quite some time. But yeah,
Well, it's funny. We've talked to a lot of people who have been professionals in the Christian nationalism field, and
Mm.
it sort of dawned on me that you all are kind of like the health professionals, the Dr. Fauci's
Oh right, yeah.
of the pandemic, where you've been toiling away understanding this. We could call it a cultural virus, and a lot
Mm.
of people didn't know or think about it or care about it. And then for a lot of reasons, especially January 6th,
Yeah.
2021, this thing popped above the surface in a way that your expertise really becomes crucial. How did you start studying all of this 10 years ago? Like what was it that got you into this? And if you want to talk about how you became a sociologist, feel free. I
Yeah.
was a sociology major and anthropology major in college, long,
Oh,
long,
there you
long
go.
ways back. So I have very fond memories of the good people that are sociologists and anthropologists.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. It really is like this latest book, American Idolatry, really is kind of the culmination and dovetailing of both my professional and personal journeys. So when I talk about professionally why I was interested in studying Christian nationalism, a part of that is my personal journey of growing
Mm.
up in a conservative white evangelical megachurch and community where everybody's religious. We all kind of believe the same things. You worship alongside those who teach your kids in middle school or your electrician or florist or whoever. And so this tight knit rural community where being a good American is being Christian, and being Christian is, then you're a good American. And those identities just so closely intertwine and overlap. And there isn't a
Mm.
lot of questioning. if those are ever going to disagree or butt heads. And so growing up in this community and being raised, in that community, coming to the faith and being taught those values and beliefs of the Christian faith. But then as I get older and in high school and move off to college and start to see a little bit more of the world, recognizing and seeing some of the kind of cracks in what was before this unquestioned reality, and starting to think through some of the implications of the Christian faith and seeing some of the dissonance, right? To follow Christ faithfully as I'd been taught, when does that put me at odds with being a good citizen even? And before, you would never even really think that, but then all of a sudden you start to see that. And so that was part of my personal faith journey. And then in graduate school, learning mostly quantitative methods, surveys of the American public, and seeing some questions that kind of get at this idea of believing that the US is and should be a Christian nation.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, walking through that personally and thinking through that, and, a book early on that was influential was Greg.
Is that right? Okay. Hmm.
And so when reading that and then seeing and starting to learn the tools of social science, and start to see the number of Americans that believe the U.S. is or should be a Christian nation, and then starting to see what those beliefs are associated with. For me, I started to then recognize, well, it seems like a lot of the beliefs that go along with thinking the U.S. is a Christian nation are at odds with the values and beliefs of Christ and the gospel and that message that I had heard growing up. And so that was really a part of my professional journey too. So I think, in some ways bringing myself into what I was interested in, but then that really reflected back and caused me to think deeply about the faith, the expression of Christianity that I'd been handed, and finding alternative expressions out there.
When a lot of people experience something like that, they go to
Right.
college, they awaken, they move around, they realize maybe what I was told doesn't carry as well. Maybe there was
Mm-hmm.
an expiration date on that yogurt that
Yeah.
was, tasty at the time and did
Yeah.
good for me, but I'm not taking it with me. They leave Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't do that. And a lot of people of your, age, generation, experience just said, like, look, people wrapped a bunch of things together back there. It's not worth my time, worth my energy to unpack all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna let it lie. You not only didn't do that, you decided to unpack it and unravel all of that. Can you talk a bit about that? And was there a pressure there or anything to
Yeah.
just leave it
That
all?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And to be honest, for those who, like me or others who are raised within this and have found or chosen or moved away, right, and set that down and moved on, I really do have a lot of empathy for, right? I don't begrudge anybody for the journey that they're on and where they're at. Because I know for me that I've had those moments of,
Mm-hmm.
darkness or dark nights of the soul, whether it was, for me, not so much how this expression of the Christian faith that I study that's associated with Christian nationalism. It's a very particular expression.
Yeah.
How that has been intertwined with politics and really kind of taken over a lot of American Christianity in various sectors. That has never shaken me too much because I see those expressions of Christianity, especially, one example that I always return to is the Black church, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
all that they faced for centuries, and finding that way forward, and the theological tools that they created or that they have passed on, I think are so helpful for understanding what it means to follow Christ and be and recognize that this isn't
Mm-hmm.
that we aren't called to dominate this world, but to faithfully live within it. And so that's always encouraged me. I think what's been more difficult for me is just some of the, as a parent and a parent of special needs children, I think that has been part of that journey too, where the faith that I was handed was always victorious. And
Mm-hmm.
if there was ever a valley,
Wow.
it's only a part of the story of, look at me now, I'm out of it and I'm on the top. and God is taking me out. And so for my own personal journey,
Yeah.
um, that hasn't, that isn't part of the narrative, right? There is
Hmm.
no just kind of, it's over now, and look what happened. And so just some of those theological tools associated with Christian nationalism, just can't serve. They just do not work in this experience. And so I think that's been a part of it too, where for me that's been the tougher road, I think, is finding the theological tools within Christianity to help make sense of that, and then thinking how that influences how we relate to one another, right? The common good, vote common good, right? Like the common flourishing, how can we be a
Yeah.
part of that? And Christian nationalism just continually is not interested
Right.
in the common good.
Yeah, and there's a lot of expressions of within Christianity, unfortunately, that don't have that feel to it. And I'm with you. I mean, been the greatest attraction to me of Christianity. That's why I stay affiliated with it and try to
Mm-hmm.
do work inside the structures of it, because I do
Mm-hmm.
think there's a beautiful story there that wants to be inclusive.
Right.
But so many people's experience, so many expressions of it, of the way we organize our churches and denominations, and just the whole thing can feel an awful lot like an us, not them kind of attitude. So
Yeah.
it doesn't surprise me that Christian nationalism flourishes inside of Christianity in some ways, because
Mm.
people are just enculturated so deeply into the binary distinctions of
Mm.
just fill in the blank. You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
this podcast is more about you, but I think about it myself. When I first got into Christianity, I was dating the person who's now my wife, and I was new to Christianity, like brand new, didn't grow up in any of it or anything. But I went to church
Mm.
with her. Went to a Missouri Synod Lutheran church, which
Yeah.
no one needs to know about the intricacies of Lutheranism, but
Yeah.
this is the much more conservative wing. Um,
For sure.
the Wisconsin Synod Lutherans will remind you, oh, not as conservative as we are, therefore not as right, but pretty. The Missouri Synod people, pretty conservative. And when I go to church with their family, which they really wanted me to do, when
Mm.
communion would happen, I would have to like scoop my big long legs over while everybody in the pew slid out beside me, these narrow little pews,
Yeah. Yeah.
and or
Yeah.
stand up and wait, because they wouldn't let me have communion in that church. Like, here's this
Right.
thing. It wasn't a heartbreaker. I didn't want to take communion in that church anyway. I didn't
Mm.
understand what they were doing, and didn't feel like I was missing out on a wafer and a sip of juice.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that experience of,
Mm. Mm.
you can be here, you can date, but now we've reached a point where there's an in and an out. And man,
Yeah.
we've all, I think, had those times, and Christian nationalism is certainly built around it. Can I pivot that into another question, and then I want to come back
Yeah.
to a comment you wrote about your book?
Yeah. Please do.
There's a lot of sociologists who don't want to talk about their own religious experience as well as
Mm.
forthrightly as you do. Now, I think it's helpful for people in Christian nationalism work to know that you have your own drive and interest, personal interest, and
Hmm.
you're not out to get Christians. um,
Right.
but any pressure? How did you think about being as forthright and even writing a book that's really about your area of study, Christian nationalism, and the work you do, the very specific sociological and data-based work,
Hmm.
taking that material to write a book like the one that we're going to talk about today, which has a focus on the effect of this Christian nationalism in faith communities as much as it does in the civic society. Do you want to talk a little bit about your choice to be a public sociologist in very public spaces, and also being forthright about your own Christian commitments and experience and faith?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about that. Like with a lot of things in life, probably it's you find yourself down the road and you look back and you're like, oh wow, here I am. How did I get here? So I don't know if there was this moment where I was like, okay, now I am pivoting. But I think as I was studying Christian nationalism, years ago, and then the first book comes out. And then seeing how helpful it was to folks, where they would come up and say this provided a framework, right? We could make sense of what was going on here. um, so then I co-wrote that with Sam Perry, who obviously has done a lot of great work too, even beyond that. And so we're writing for more public audiences, and I think that was really engaging and important, just to be able to show that social science has a framework, has things to
Mhm.
offer to help make sense for those who are interested in these topics. And so it got to the point where, I look at this book and I can almost point out the paragraph or two in our first book that
Mhm.
kind of were the seeds, the germination of this book, where just kind of highlighting that, for many Christians, when they say Christianity, loves its neighbors and kind of go down the list, when we look at what Christian nationalism is associated with over and over, it's hard to make a case that it's about loving your neighbors,
Right.
all the way through. And
Right.
so for me, it came to that point where it was like, well, if I can build this or write this next book with the foundation of all the empirical research that we have, of this is what Christian nationalism is, this is what
Mm.
we know about it, and start from there. But then to kind of lay my cards on the table and show that, well, now I'm moving beyond the empirical and I'm
Mhm.
going to move in to make normative statements as a Christian myself. I think hopefully I can reach that audience, fellow Christians, those who, I get emails still and before, or folks coming up to me and just saying, as I was in church looking around, wondering, how did we get here? What's going on? And this has helped me
Yeah.
understand that. Right. And so now wanting to hopefully reach that audience and say to those maybe who haven't heard of it, you know, this is a part of my journey. A lot of other people are on this journey. No matter where you are on the journey, hopefully you can come in and learn more about where we've all been, where we're going, and what Christian nationalism is, and
Yeah.
how it not only threatens democracy in a real way, but threatens the Christian church, and that there are expressions of Christianity out there that we can move toward, um, conservative, progressive,
Yeah.
moderate,
Right.
wherever you
Right.
might define yourself, there are expressions that move away from Christian nationalism, and we can do that together. And so yeah, I think for me, just wanting to be forthright with, okay,
Mm.
now I'm moving into that normative space and making claims, that go beyond the data, but always building from that foundation as a
Mhm.
social scientist of what we know in the science. So
You probably don't read the comments on Amazon about the book. I did, and I want to share it with you. And if you don't
yeah,
read them, good for you. There's
yeah,
there's nothing good to be found there,
yeah,
for you as the author.
yeah.
Uh, but I thought this was an insightful. I thought this was a comment that gave insight
Mm,
into a view that a lot of people have that I think would
mm,
be a nice pivot for us to talk about the book. So if you don't
yeah.
mind, on my phone here, I'm going to read this comment. Um, it's entitled "Don't Waste Your Money." Uh, I'm buying the book. So the person says.
Yeah.
And the person writes, "This is an agenda. The author is trying to jump on a political bandwagon without including the context of scripture. I would give it 0 stars if I could. I listened
Mm,
to him speak about the book and was nothing but a political push against a certain group. He has also a limited understanding of the Supreme Court, which he's mentioning because he used a certain case to make people emotional to continue pushing his agenda. Don't waste your money. My book turned into a coaster until trash day." I mean, clever little ending there. Setting aside the fact of the person telling other people not to waste their money,
mhm,
I thought that was interesting. We've run into this as well, and I'm sure anybody who brings up the term Christian nationalism
mhm,
to a person who might be akin to Christian nationalism,
mhm.
they're like, "Oh, now you're doing a political thing on me. Now you're attacking my faith, and now you don't understand the scriptures in the Bible." Um, can you just talk a bit about that and how this book fits into that, sparing the details of that comment, um, and how important that is because of the
Mhm,
percentage of people, I don't know, 30 million people, maybe something like that, maybe more,
mhm.
50 million, who hold the Christian nationalist views, sometimes at a very, very deep level. When they hear this, they're like, here comes the political agenda again. Here comes the leftist, anti-God, anti-religion people
Mhm.
just trying to find another way to attack good, wholesome, Christian folk in America. And they really don't understand.
Yeah. Yeah, that comment has a really interesting story because it actually, I had a trip where I was invited out to Iowa last month and spoke at a couple colleges. And I know because this person had a question during the Q&A. So
Oh,
I literally know, I don't know this person, but I know that the person that asked this question later left this review. So I doubt they read the book at all, but are really
interesting.
responding to the presentation that I gave. And so, their question was about, well, you talk about the Bible, and the Bible is clearly against homosexuality. And so, how are, for Christians who hold that view, and how could Christian nationalism be wrong then, in this sense? And so I tried to make the case, or underscore, like I do in the book and in that comment, or in answering that comment, that there are a number of expressions of Christianity. Anybody that says there's just this one true distilled version that we're all trying to get back to, doesn't realize or understand that culturally Christianity has been influenced across the centuries and is now, and there are different expressions even within our country, outside of it, and all that. And that there are Christians that all take the Bible very seriously, but come to different views on, for this particular question, homosexuality. And so, again, with Christian nationalism, it's underscoring a particular expression of Christianity to see that expression alone privileged in the public sphere. Whereas what I'm trying to argue or highlight is that there are a number of expressions of Christianity that take seriously scripture,
Mm-hmm.
and come to different conclusions. And perhaps our goal shouldn't be to enshrine just this one, but to live among and alongside folks of other faiths or no faith, or other Christians who believe differently, and finding a common way forward together. And
Yeah.
so, kind of this claim that, folks who oppose Christian nationalism just don't take the Bible seriously. I think that's false.
Yeah,
We
for
do
sure.
take the Bible seriously, and so that's where that comment is coming from. This claim that you must not believe the Bible. Where in the book, I do take the Bible seriously, and I think there are things, in the first chapter, right? Whatever the gospel is and how we define it.
Mm-hmm.
In Luke 4, I draw on that Jesus' first, public speaking, when he's talking about freeing the prisoners and the
Yeah.
oppressed, and healing the blind. I think to take the Bible seriously is to say that he was literally talking about oppressed and imprisoned and folks
Mm-hmm.
like that, rather than just spiritualizing it. And I think spiritualizing it actually doesn't take the Bible
Bible
seriously,
seriously. Yeah.
but that is where folks might go with that. So that's where that comment is. And so I think to just kind of let this narrative continue, that folks who might have different political views, whatever it might be, about homosexuality, and there are people that might believe similarly that the Bible is clear on homosexuality, but
Mm-hmm.
still have different ideas about how politically that should operate in America. And so I
Yeah.
think there needs to be room for that discussion too. And to just say, well, you have to be against this, you have to be against that, or else you're not Christian, or you don't take the Bible seriously. That's the narrative that we have to push
Right.
back on. And that's where that comment comes from.
And in some ways, that's one of the key points for some Christian nationalists. And you're very good at articulating that there's not one Christianity. There never has been. I like to be reminded. That's why there's 4 gospels. The whole thing starts right out of the chutes. The first time they gather up a collection, it's like, well, we're not going to have one gospel. There's going to be
Yeah,
4,
right.
and they don't agree with each other. So right out of the way, you're into the multiple expressions and multiple storytelling
Yeah.
and so on. And there's multiple versions of Christian nationalism. Like, not all Christian nationalists are the same. And this is something I've learned very deeply in the last few years, is and I think there's a particular variant, to borrow that COVID metaphor again,
Mm-hmm.
there's new variant of this virus that's alive and well and is the most popular now, that
Mm.
really wasn't around at other periods of time. It's been reshaped and reformed. We can talk about that if we have time to get to it, if you want to later.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this idea that Christian nationalism equals conservative Christianity is importantly not true as well. The first people I heard about Christian nationalism as being a threat were from very conservative Christians,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mennonites and other people, a bunch of Anabaptists, like really conservative theologically, socially, and culturally that
Mhm.
said, we have to have a gospel that separates us from America. You can't blend those things together. I hear the same thing from super progressive people and from people that are moderate. And I hear actually super progressive people that talk like Christian nationalists sometimes. It makes me
Right.
crazy. They just pick a different Bible passage. They pick Matthew 5 to care for the weak instead of, Romans 12. Like they're just
Mhm.
picking different passages, but they're still acting as if the United States and the call of the gospel as they understand it can be unified into one
Mhm.
idea. So
Yeah.
but it's really hard to not end up in this conservative uh, progressive spectrum when you're talking about Christian nationalism, even though I think it's on a different continuum altogether. Do
Mhm.
you think do you think similarly? Do you think it's not helpful or right to just conflate the social or theological conservatism or progressivism with Christian nationalism?
Yeah, I do. And so if we're talking empirically, right, there folks that are more politically conservative are more likely to embrace Christian nationalism to various extents. And then those that are more liberal or progressive politically less likely to
Mhm.
do so. So it
Mhm.
does operate within this sphere. It isn't wholly subsumed under political views, though. But I think, especially for Christians, those that identify with the Christian faith, I think finding common cause with those who might have different political expressions or views, to highlight that there are things that we hold in common that Christian nationalism threatens.
Mm.
I think that's really important. So, there are
Okay.
folks that are more religiously conservative than me, let's say, like Russell Moore. I'm sure there are things that I differ with him on religiously, but he's at a point now, and I am too, on this journey where we both recognize the
Mhm.
threat of Christian nationalism and speak against it. And so I think those are important stories
Yeah.
to tell, highlight that it isn't just if you're politically liberal or progressive, then you must have no problems. There are still going to be issues we need to recognize. And if you're
Yeah.
conservative, it doesn't mean that you automatically embrace Christian nationalism.
Right.
So one example, I was on a podcast, and one of the hosts, votes Republican every 4 years, right, and every 2 years, like he's just politically conservative, and so also a Christian asking, well, how can we work together, right? How can we coexist? Because are you saying I'm just always going to be this? And I would say no. And there's a an article that I pointed to in First Things. I don't know if you're aware of that. It's an online. Well, I think it used to be a magazine, but it's online now. And so nobody would look at First Things and say that this is a progressive or liberal
Yeah.
publication, but
Yeah.
it's Christian. Um,
The
and
magazine is called First Things, right? That's
yeah,
the one.
First
Yeah.
Things.
For
Yeah, yeah,
people
yeah.
that might be
And
interested in it. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, and so very conservative publication, but there was an article on there about the conservative case for single payer healthcare,
Uh-huh.
and the person writing it, now he operates outside of the U.S. in a missionary context, and so that probably is part of it, right? Like he has a different view on it, but just goes down the line of politically and religiously. If you're conservative, politically or Christian, um, this is why single payer healthcare would be better. It is
Mm.
it is the conservative position. Now, if you were in any space that really embraced Christian nationalism, you talk about single payer healthcare, there's no way they will see that as part of the platform. But
Mm.
here I'm saying, look, this is from a conservative position arguing for this again,
Mm.
position that has just been branded as outside the conservative position. I think that's instructive, right? Where can we see those things? And that helps, again, helps us confront and oppose Christian nationalism that would not be interested in any sort of
Mm.
common healthcare to serve folks all across the spectrum. So that's one example, but I think it is important to recognize there is a lot of overlap, but there are areas where these aren't one and the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's no need to assume if you meet a conservative Christian person that they're going to be a Christian nationalist. But it's
Right.
not a bad idea to check, you know,
Well,
because it
and,
can be so pervasive and people don't
yeah,
even know it. Yeah.
yeah. And even then, I think I shy away from even using the term Christian nationalist to talk about people. I like to talk about the ideology Christian
Mm.
nationalism because it doesn't exist on a binary. It's not your either or. And I think when we create again that either or, you're either it or you're not.
Mm.
That's unhelpful. I think it exists on a spectrum, and we embrace it more or less strongly. And so wherever we're at on our
Yeah.
journey, thinking through those that kind of are embracing it, right in the middle, it's still important to think of, well, how can we let go of some more of this to move it further down the line? And then we don't essentialize each other too, which I think is really important, right? People aren't just this binary, you're a Christian nationalist and that's it. But there are aspects where we need to continue to think through, well, how am I embracing aspects of this view, and how can I move towards what I think is an expression of Christianity that is interested in meeting people and the marginalized where they're at, and then leveraging our privilege to help serve them.
All right. Let me do the thing that people probably do to you when you're on an airplane or on a panel
Yeah,
or
yeah,
on a podcast. Andrew, what is Christian nationalism? Give it to me short and quick. How
yep,
can someone know what it is? What is it?
yeah. So Christian nationalism is a cultural framework that idealizes and advocates for a particular expression of Christianity to be privileged in American civic life, and for the government to privilege this particular expression of Christianity as the central organizing cultural framework of how we do life here in the United States.
I love that definition. So good. I'm going to clip that and share it around. Is it not then fair to say, based on our previous point of the conversation, someone who holds that framework, operates within that framework, supports that framework,
Mhm.
is a Christian nationalist? So can you just talk about more broadly, even as both a sociologist and a person with an opinion, the
Yeah.
isms of anything:
Yeah.
socialism, communism, capitalism, and a capitalist, a socialist, a communist, a Christian nationalist?
Yeah.
Can you just talk about the difference between that ideology that's held and a person that holds to that ideology not being a nationalist, Christian nationalist?
Yeah. Well, and it could be it's just a personal preference of my own to not label folks. And what's been interesting too is for some folks in this space, Marjorie Taylor Greene is an example, right? She like claims that title of Christian nationalist and wants to redefine it, right? Her
Yeah.
definition of
Puts it
what
on
that
shirts, literally. I am a
yeah,
proud Christian nationalist. Yep.
yeah, is different than what we're talking about in social science and empirically.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't just loving your nation and then being a Christian. That's not it. That's not. We've never said that that type of thing. And so, yeah, for me, I think continuing to talk about the ism hopefully helps open up space for conversation too. That when I come and talk to someone, they may embrace it pretty strongly,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't mean that that is the entirety of
Yes.
how they see the social world or who they are, or that they're not on a journey. I think, there are some folks that do embrace it really strongly, would be totally fine with being labeled a Christian nationalist,
Mm-hmm.
um, but and don't have any desire to kind of wrestle with the implications of that. And so, those aren't folks that I probably will be able to reach or have a lot of conversation with around this topic. But even then, when they view that term or that label as derogatory, I think it's unhelpful again to just open up
Mm-hmm.
space for conversation. And I don't use it in a derogatory term. I think it's we've clarified the definition and what we're talking about, and so it's if you embrace Christian nationalism, it's a empirically appropriate way to describe their political theology and worldview.
Yeah.
And so that's what we need to talk about, I think.
Yeah, look, I think that's so spot on and so important. Just overall, that we separate the viewpoints we have from the identities that we affiliate with. They're
Right.
not always the same. We all think a lot of things and hold to a lot of frameworks, some of which we're aware of, some of which we're not. We're just
Yeah.
operating in them. That's just how human beings are.
Yeah.
And to then assign particular categorizations of identity to someone who doesn't choose it for themselves. In our training, it's one of our
Mm.
points of what we want to train people to do is empathy and engagement, and to not attribute to someone
Mm.
identity that they don't attribute to themselves, but to
Yeah.
talk about the ideas that people hold to or that are operative. I got this
Yeah.
from you and Sam. That these, I think it was in one of our trainings that first ones that we did with you, where you said, look, Christian nationalism views are performative in a person's view of the world. They do things. If you hold that view, it also means, statistically speaking, you're more likely to hold these other views. So it is doing something. And that's different than you are something. I don't know,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be the philosopher as well here, with human beings and human doings. But
Yeah.
there's a big difference between that. And it's good for us to identify that and to go after, especially this idea that you articulated so clearly in that definition that you've had to refine and with the precision of a well-trained author and sociologist have
Right.
got down to the least amount of words possible. But it really, to me, is this act of privileging some version of Christianity with
Yeah.
the power of the government, the state,
Yeah.
local, and federal government.
Yeah.
Is that a way for someone, if they're walking around this tree multiple times trying to understand what Christian nationalism is? Is it really, is it as important as I'm putting the emphasis on, that it's the privileging with the power of government a certain version of Christianity or certain views? Would that be?
Yeah. It is. It is. I think, and even with in this book, American Idolatry, the central idol, as I talk about it, is power. So I think that really is the central organizing framework of Christian nationalism, is the will to power. And so power is the ability to get others to do what you want despite resistance. And politics
Mm,
and power and living together, like, there's no way for Christians to opt out of that, right? If we're going to live among other people, we are engaged in politics. So anybody that's like saying, oh, there's a third way where we just aren't going to be a part of that,
mm-hmm,
like, hopefully those that listen to this at some point will start to recognize that is a position that flows from privilege. Because if the political structures are coming
mm,
after you, you don't get to opt out, right? But for a white man like myself, Protestant Christian, there's the likelihood of politics coming after me and my embodied reality is really low. Like, it probably won't ever happen. Even if folks that I disagree with who embrace Christian nationalism come to power, they probably aren't going to pass a lot of stuff that's going to directly
mm,
oppress or affect me. Right. But as I listen to the voices of those on the margins or being crushed by these different political structures, or throughout history have been on the outside, then I can start to see through their eyes and their experiences they're telling me, and I listen to them and believe them.
mm,
I can start to see that, okay, privileging this particular expression of Christianity, and with it having its hands on levers of power, it's usually working to benefit folks like me that look like me, worship like me, whatever else. And I think my Christian faith is pushing me in a direction where that isn't doing good in the world,
mm,
right? That
mm-hmm,
that Jesus called us to side with those who are marginalized,
mm,
and that the gospel is a message of not only a personal relationship with God. I think that's part of it, but it's incomplete. The gospel is bigger. It's talking about how we relate to one another,
mm-hmm.
right? And trying to heal the brokenness and sin-soaked structures of the world, so that there's a common flourishing.
Yeah.
And we can be a part of that work, and we should be. That's why I think that opting out is no good, right? That
Yeah.
isn't
Right.
following Christ. That we need to live and work within these
Mm-hmm.
structures, because that's what we're called to do, and that's the way that life works. But how can we do that in such a way that it isn't about privileging this particular group, but that we're opening up the possibility for engagement, social belonging, civil rights benefits for all Americans, not just those who align with a particular social arrangement or structure.
Yeah. I- I'm in a conversation with lots of people that hold Christian nationalist views, partly because I bring it up a lot, and
Yeah,
people know you're safe to talk to, and I seek out people. And there's a
yeah,
group of people who are very, very strongly advocate for a greater role of prayer in America.
mm-hmm.
They're really happy that prayer opens public meetings. I'm
Mm-hmm.
very bothered by such things. They're very happy that there's chaplains for our state and federal
Yeah.
governments. That I'm very bothered by the fact that we uh, have chaplains in those functions that are specifically doing the bidding of the government. Um, they really want prayer in school,
Mm-hmm.
but not if it's led by Muslims. So a
Right.
bunch of people here where I live in Minnesota were very riled up by the fact that public charter schools that are catering toward people from Somalia
Yeah.
have prayer in the school because
Yeah.
it's Muslim prayer.
Hmm.
These are the same people advocating for greater prayer for chaplains, for all the rest of this, right? They want more of that. They don't want us to take God out of the schools, but not that expression of God in the
Yeah.
schools.
Yeah.
That is, it seems like, I don't know. I guess if someone was like, look, I think religion's great. It's a powerful force in people's lives. There should be more religion in our society. We shouldn't be, no matter what the religion, right?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
That rarely happens. It's most
Yeah.
often this other thing. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
would these people say I'm a Christian nationalist? No way would they identify with that term. They may not even hear the well-articulated, 12-word description you had and say like,
Mhm.
no, not really. But when it comes down to it, they'd be like, hey, that coach should be praying on Friday nights at the football game, but
Right.
the imam shouldn't be praying at, 3 times a day during school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that it sort of in a moment?
Sorry, I think I froze up
Yeah,
there.
you did, but it was right at the right moment, so it looked like you were really pondering my
Yeah.
question of
Yeah.
doesn't that kind of capture it? Do you
Mm.
think that is one,
Yeah. No,
expression of this?
I think those examples perfectly capture again that desire for privilege, and the assumption that, well, my kind of Christianity, let's say, is representative of just enough of our country's history or the people that are living right now that it should be privileged, that it should,
Yeah.
if we're going to be religious or do anything religious, it might as well be this, might as well be mine. But like you said, when you start to pull some of those threads and think about, well, what if the tables were turned and what might
Yeah.
that feel like? And I think that's where, for Christians, recognizing that we're living in a country that is more religiously and ethnically diverse now than it has been ever, right? There's going to be a lot of other voices and perspectives operating in that. And we're living in a time right now where, you know, the largest group of Americans are those who are not affiliated with any religious
Mm.
tradition, right? Like if you put all Christians together, it's still a majority of the country. But if you break out Catholics and mainline and evangelical Protestants, you know, some of our top
Mm.
three Christian traditions, they're smaller than the group that is the unaffiliated. And so what does it feel like for them to live and work and go about
Mhm.
their daily lives in this context? And so then I think, you know, recognizing, well, supporting a pluralistic democratic society where you don't have to adhere to a particular expression even of Christianity to feel truly American, I think is important. And it's a way to love our neighbors.
Mm.
There's a, you know, good friend of mine, Andrew Seidel, who is, and he would say this, so I'm not speaking for him, but, you know, is an atheist and I
Mhm.
am a Christian. And so we have deep differences in beliefs about the
Mhm.
cosmos and all these things. But we hold values, we have particular values that we hold the same. And it's the right of each other to exist, to
Mm.
be fully American, to take
Yeah.
part,
Yeah.
to represent what we're doing here. And when we have those values, and I think, you know, Doug, the work you're doing, Vote Common Good, all of these things are a part of that work. And so that is so
Yeah.
important. But when we hold those values in the same, then we can have discussions with those who have beliefs that are very different, that are productive and don't actively harm them or push them to the side. And that to me is, as a Christian, that I think is living out the gospel where we're trying to bring a flourishing and a common good to our public life, those
Mhm.
around us.
Yeah, and
And other, yeah, go ahead.
and we should be clear, this stuff isn't easy. It wasn't easy in all the periods of the development of Christianity. It's raised in the Gospels. It's raised in the Jewish texts about what's the relationship between kings and kingdoms and the
Yeah.
call of God and the prophets. Like it is a universal human experience in the last 6,000 years of recorded human history, or we'll
Right.
just call it since the existence of the earth in the last 5 or 6,000 years for that
Yeah.
crowd.
There you
Uh,
go.
it has been an ongoing issue.
For
Jesus
sure.
raises it. The apostles write about it. The early church struggled with it. Constantine screwed it up. Augustine doubled down on the screw up. In my view, it's been troubling theologically, and it's been troubling civically. to the
Yeah.
point that in the United States, when we decided to have a nation and not a series of colonies, right out of the chutes, they're like, okay, we're going to try to answer this question. Amendment 1,
Yeah.
no establishment of religion. That tells you it was a big question of the day,
Yeah.
right? So
For
we
sure.
shouldn't be as flippant as we sometimes are, the people who hold the views that I hold, you hold, and I'm not saying you're flippant people, but are
Great
like,
point.
look,
Yeah.
this is easy. Like it's just this or that. And it's not. This is a negotiation day after day after day on how
Right.
you do this. How do you render to Caesar what is Caesar and to God what is God? How do you give into the authorities because they're put in place by God? How do you follow the cross and not the shield? Like all this stuff that's in the
Mhm.
Christian traditions and the Jewish traditions, it's really hard. And
Yeah.
we should approach this, I think, with a little more, I don't know, like this is a project that is so American
Mm.
and a project that is actually so Christian. I don't want to speak for other traditions, religious traditions, but if you're Christian and American, both both parts of those identities have been wrestling with this question, and we need to keep it refreshed and not be like, Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter to the church in
Mhm.
Virginia
Yeah.
and said there's a separation of church and state. Problem solved. Let's move on. It's like
Yeah.
that. And I know we hear that a lot from the people that support the views that I hold. And I'm like, that doesn't even begin to get there. I mean, Thomas Jefferson wouldn't have thought that ever begins to get there.
Yeah.
The reason he wrote that was after, anyway, like there was already a constitution and amendments, and he was trying to figure out now what do you do. So,
Yeah. Totally.
okay, I know I talked a lot there, but do you have any thoughts on that? That this is an ongoing project that we should be taking more seriously at every level of our civic
Yeah,
life?
for sure. No, I think those are excellent points. And here's the thing with that too. Folks that embrace Christian nationalism have particular political, social views. They have a right to exist in this
Sure.
country and bring those thoughts and beliefs into the public square. But what we're trying to say is that those shouldn't be privileged or have the only route to power, that other groups need to be a part of it. And then working together to find a common way forward. And that's going to be
Yep.
really messy, really difficult, not easy. And so I think too, I hope I worked hard at the tone of the book to be like, this isn't like I've arrived and here's the answer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on a journey and others are on a journey, and let's journey together to work this out. But there are going to be certain things that we do have to hold as the foundation, and identifying the gospel is something that should motivate us to seek the good of all people and those around us, and to try and move in such a way in the world that we're bringing more people into the common benefits, because there are a lot of things that I'm grateful for being born
Mm.
here by accident, right? Historical accident. Um,
Yeah.
and
And if you
so
talk to your parents, maybe by, personal
yeah,
accident too, who
yeah,
knows, right?
totally, depending, right? And so yeah, just I think there's a element of humility, and as I listen to you talk, and that I want to, keep pushing on myself too, where this isn't that we just have answers, but that we
Yeah.
need to get comfortable with the questions. We need to get comfortable with the tension. There's always going to be tension. And so, there's some podcasts where like, well, here's this one, type of situation that could happen. So what do you do then? Shouldn't Christians just have control? Like answer this one thing. And like, well, every situation is so different and complicated, but I think having these values as the foundation, then we can move in and have conversations depending on the particularities of what we're coming up against and how can we seek good for all. And so that's
Yeah.
difficult,
Yeah.
right? There's
It
gray
is.
area and it's hard, but I
And
think
I
it's
feel like what broke this thing, and this is just my bias,
okay.
this is going to be my expressions, not yours. So you're just
Hmm.
going to be, just going to get secondhand smoke on you on this one.
Okay.
Um, Donald Trump broke this thing in a whole fresh new way
Mm.
because not even his own doing, the crowd that came around Trump conjured up a 25, 30-year-old notion that the new apostolic reformation people are into, that God chooses particular leaders at certain times to accomplish God's purposes in the world.
Mm-hmm.
God's primary purpose in the world is to use the United States and the nation of Israel to fulfill God's ecclesiological and future agenda in the world through
Mm.
church and religion and so on, that the Christianization of the planet is what is going to ultimately fulfill God's purposes. And Donald Trump is the unique character that God chose to do this. Pat Robertson says that stuff. I've been in meetings with Michael Flynn where he says that stuff. Like, this stuff is just pushed all the time.
Mhm.
So the blend, this is my theory on a new variant. The new variant of Christian nationalism is deeply surrounded this seven mountains philosophy of
Mhm.
influence, that there's seven areas of society that Christians should have dominance of. And it's all the areas of society, by the way.
Yeah.
And that there's key leaders who are picked to fulfill God's purposes. So when someone starts talking about what was written in the Constitution or age-old agreements, they're like, yeah, but that's not, there's this other theory of
Mm.
what God's agenda is for the world to Christianize the planet through the United States and Israel specifically. And
Mm.
that's what's up.
Mm.
That's a lot. If no one's ever heard any of that, you can go back and listen to our podcast. We go with our trainings and all that stuff. We go through all this stuff. Do you have any thoughts about that? The new Apostolic Reformation's view of the Seven Mountains philosophy and key leader, theologies, and why it is that a King Cyrus character like Donald Trump is God's ultimate purpose? And do you buy my take on this? And do you think that also broke America in a new way?
Yeah. No, I think the Seven Mountains and dominionist theology and ideology that has been influential for decades, right? And that was a part of it. And a lot of it was being interacted with at kind of the more elite levels, right, of the political, religious folks writing about that. And it would kind of trickle down and distill down and then get out into the people, because a lot of our work, right, is surveying Americans. And kind of the rank and file or the people in the pews, if you talked about, do you know what the New Apostolic Reformation is or dominionist theology or anything like that? I mean, the majority have, they're not going to know. But if you're talking about, well, should Christianity be very influential in these various areas, that type of thinking has percolated out. And
Yep.
so, whether folks are aware of it or not, that's definitely a part of what we're thinking and drinking. And I think, listening to you, a point that I like to make and recognize is that Donald Trump wasn't something new on the scene, but he was a natural kind of endpoint to what was happening, in the 70s in response to the 60s, but with the rise of religious right. And I think, in many ways, he was an important test of the power of Christian nationalism in the sense that he's not personally Christian and doesn't really care to present himself that way, but he is willing to use that rhetoric and provide access to power for those that have a very particular view of American civic life. And he's willing to do that. And so for those folks, they were singing the praises. And in that sense, when folks feel like their vision for the world is legitimized by the sacred, and this is God's vision for the world, they're more than willing to set aside anything in their way, including democracy, in order to see that come to pass. And I think that's what we're facing right now, is that when democracy provided the results that aligned with where they would want to see the country go, then fine. But the second that it doesn't, well, then we need to figure out, well, who actually can participate, right? And limit that. And that's been a part of the project for decades too.
Yep. Ideas need people, and they don't just need people to be behind the ideas. They need the personification of the idea. If we were speaking theologically, we would say the word becomes flesh and dwells among you. The words have to have a human expression. That's why we have spokespeople for things. Think about the environmental movement and that. What's that girl's name? The school.
Greta Thunberg, the young.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I have since forgotten, but like her story is like she did a thing, and then people rally around, and there's somebody. Donald Trump is that character. He is that's why the attack on January 6th was like Christian flags, a noose for Mike Pence, and pictures of Donald Trump and Trump hats. Like it's the thing that's needed for this. And I feel like that Trumpism, even though many people in Trumpism world and, whatever, however they want to view themselves, a bunch of them, they call themselves red hatters, but the red hatters they're not all Christian nationalists. Some of them don't even care or think about it. But I was in a bar with Proud Boys in Florida in a debate with them in October of 2020.
Oh, man.
Yeah. You can watch that video sometime. And they were full on Christian nationalists. Like the most hardcore biker Proud Boys were also advocating Christian ideas, which is why someone like me, an evangelical pastor traveling the country telling people not to vote for Donald Trump, was such a particular anathema to them, right?
Yeah.
It's the point of the spear kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's just mixed up in a way. And man, I have seen so many people who have said they've become big Trump supporters, big Christian nationalist boosters, who said, 7 or 8 years ago, my Christianity didn't mean anything to me. This
Mm,
brought me back to my faith. I've been
mm,
hearing this stuff. God's like, there is an actual Christian movement of devotion
yeah.
inside of this world. Michael Flynn's events, they're baptizing people at them, and there's
Right.
altar calls. Like, so that's the other thing. This isn't like some old stale idea that's been around for a while and we just can't seem to get over it. Like the common cold. We could
Mhm.
solve for COVID, but we can't solve for the common cold. It's not the common cold. I think it's like this is really something that people are emboldened in in the very Christian faith they profess by
Yeah.
this. Do you see that too? And I know we have to go, but
Yeah.
do you see that there's an emboldening of people
No,
into a faith that holds Christian nationalism central?
yeah, I think so. I think, yeah, wrapping up identity and ritual and the power of all of that together, right? That like you said, some of those, they're rallies, but they're revivals, right? And and they
Yes.
really take on that feel, and those are powerful things. And again, with the particular expression of Christianity that makes up Christian nationalism and legitimizing our vision for the world in the sacred, those are all really powerful things. And so what we're facing right now today, or whether it was January 6th, Christian nationalism isn't the only story, right?
Right.
There are a lot of things
Good
working
point.
together with this that make kind of what we're facing so daunting and difficult to unravel. But it is a key part of it, right? And understanding what Christian nationalism is and how it operates, and see it then as a part of this larger story and what we're facing, I think is one of the ways that we have to kind of unravel this and
Hmm.
hopefully equip folks to respond to these things, or for those who are maybe embracing aspects of it to gain a sense of
There
maybe
you go.
where this is pushing them in a
Hmm.
direction that maybe they really wouldn't want to be pushed, but now they find themselves on. So
Wow. Yeah.
yeah.
Hey, so the book is called American Idolatry. The subtitle is How Christian Nationalism Betrays the Gospel and Threatens the Church. Um, in my Amazon thing today, it said, can arrive at my house by 2 p.m. today. And that was
There
at
you go.
7:30 this morning. So I don't know, somehow it's
Yeah,
in the fast track. I bring that up because someone might want to order it for a stocking stuffer for your friends. If you have
there
a
you
white
go.
elephant gift party this weekend, it's a great white elephant gift party, or to set out on your coffee table, or give to that friend you're not quite sure
Yeah,
about. So there's a lot of, sometimes people only think about books for themselves, but this might
yeah,
be one that could be a great little conversation starter,
yeah,
and also a good one for groups. Andrew, if people are super into this, and
yeah.
Alex already said in the chat she's made the purchase,
Yes, thank you, Alex.
is there another are there other books that you used in getting into this you think would be helpful? Do you have any other additional resources after people do the right thing and click on the American Idolatry purchase button?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do believe in the book, and so thank you for helping raise that awareness. There are a couple other things that I'll mention real quick. One is I did a 4-part podcast on Christian nationalism that folks can find on Apple. It's American Idols is the name of it, so kind of close to the book.
Hmm.
And then two, we created a book discussion guide with this, so it is great for groups. And I was just at a church where an adult Sunday school did it, and they had people all across the spectrum, and there were folks that were not. This was a challenging book for them, and I get it. It is hard, it is challenging, but we have to press in, and they were willing to, and so that was great. But even with the as an academic citing my sources, right? As you follow the footnotes, you're going to see those books that have been really influential to me. I think, a number of those folks, early on in my journey, Greg Boyd's The Myth of a Christian Nation was really influential to me. And he's moved, in a different direction from then too. And so have I. And so just seeing that journey has been good.
Hmm.
Caitlin Chess, her book, I'm going to get it wrong. The politics. Oh gosh, what is
Do
it?
you know how to spell her
I have
name, her last name? Caitlin.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know that
Yeah.
person.
Well, this is her latest book. I have it right here. Caitlin Chess, The Ballot in the Bible. This will be a really useful. I'm going through this right now.
Really?
How the Bible is misused, essentially in American politics, and where we go from here. So
Huh.
great book. Was honor. She got a honorary book award with it already.
Wow.
The Liturgy of Politics is her first book.
Okay.
That was great.
Do you know her personally?
I've met her virtually and
Uh-huh.
interacted with her some, but we've never been in the same physical place at the same
Could
time.
you
But
put a word in if we were to reach out to her to be on the podcast or be
yep,
involved in our
I'm
stuff?
sure she
Can you
would.
give us
I'm sure she would. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Andrew
No,
Whitehead
she's yeah, yeah,
approval?
yeah. Happy to do that. Yeah. So her work is great. Um, David Gushy, who I'm sure you've interacted with too,
Yes.
defending democracy from its Christian enemies. Yeah, he's got that great book. Robbie Jones, his latest book. Now this debuted as a New York Times bestseller, um, and so it's no
Yeah.
secret. But his books, The End of White Christian America, White Too Long, and then his latest book here about essentially about the doctrine of discovery and how harmful that has been to democracy and Christianity in the U.S. Those are some great ones. Yeah, Lisa Sharon Harper is
Hmm.
another one. The Very Good Gospel, that was really helpful. Yeah, so I mean, I could go on and on, but
Yeah.
in the book,
Great.
I really want to give credit to the ideas and people that have been influential. And so I think following some of those, if I write a line that you enjoy and you think and see there's a footnote, I'm going to cite the person that was really influential and kind of guiding me to that place. So,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, hopefully some of those are helpful, but, yeah, folks can find me kind of on social media, or I have
Beautiful.
a
Can I
newsletter.
take
So,
2 more minutes of your time by asking
oh
you
yeah,
to respond to this
sure.
question? We made a little joke in the podcast on Tuesday about here in the Midwest, we have a thing called the feels like temperature. So it'll say like it's
Oh
29
yeah.
degrees,
No,
but it
we
feels
look
like
at,
9.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yep,
Um,
yep.
that's kind of an important thing because human beings tend to live not by statistics and numbers, but by human experience called the
Mhm.
feels like.
Yeah.
You do all this work on Christian nationalism, you understand it. There's literally numbers and scales and people taking surveys and the
Mhm.
Bible passages and things that are being said and references. That can create one picture of Christian nationalism in America. What's the Andrew Whitehead feels like scale on Christian nationalism in America right now, and where are we? Where's your sense?
Yeah. I think, it is automatically kind of it's hard for me to disentangle what I know empirically, but then I
Hmm.
can give you the sense of how that makes me feel and what I think is going on. And so empirically, this isn't an ideology that's growing or spreading like wildfire. We don't see any evidence of that. But what we do see is folks in high levels of positions of power, like the Speaker of the U.S. House, who embrace this cultural framework. And so the group of Americans that strongly embrace it might be getting smaller, or they're the smallest group in our studies and staying that.
Hmm.
But more and more, because they feel embattled or that they're shrinking, the salience of we are the people that embrace this. We have to do what's necessary to save this country. That salience becomes greater. And so the rhetoric and the commitment to it, all of those things, I think the temperature is being turned up on that. So we're going into, we were talking before coming on the podcast, right? The next year, looking for you
Hmm.
all, what we're all going to be facing the next year. There's a lot of work to do, and I think it is a pretty influential time because, yeah, a pluralistic democratic society. We're actually a pretty young democracy here in the US. If we really look at it, it's like since the 60s, right? That all Americans have had access. And that's being rolled back. And I think that's a real threat. And so we should recognize we're in the fight, right? Like this is a part of it right now.
Hmm.
And so there's a real threat there, I think.
Right on. Andrew, thanks so much for your generous time today. I
Yeah.
hope people pick up the book and share it with friends and family. And if you're going to share it with someone, buy one for yourself and buy one for them. Um,
Yeah.
As you know, a fellow author, I like to remind people that we don't need to be the Napster of books, with
Yeah,
unauthorized distribution of copyrighted
right.
material. Stop
Yeah.
sharing your books and buy one for everybody. That's always the author's dream, right? When someone's
Yep.
like, "Hey, I got your book from the library," and then gave it to a friend, you're like, "Ooh, okay."
Yeah.
Uh, it's one purchase that got to three people, which is great. But if you're going to be, if you want to be helpful to Andrew's work and all,
Uh,
well,
appreciate
actually,
it.
if you're going to be helpful, buy 10,000 copies. That would be
Yeah.
really helpful.
Yeah, that would be
And,
great. Yeah.
stand on street corners and distribute them. But thank you,
Yeah.
buddy. Appreciate it, and enjoy the school break and all. And thanks for being able to talk with us today.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate it. I hope you all have a happy holidays.
Right on. Okay, everybody. Thanks for being in the chat. Mike, Alex, everybody. I see Antonia is new. Oh, look at what I'm doing. Look at this crazy business. I don't even know how that's happening. I don't know what that is. All right. Okay, y'all. We will talk to you next week. Bye.